Ben's Treasure Hunt by Colleen H. Robbins. The landing craft worked its way up the island's river from the sea. Ben tested the water every so often to determine the saltiness. When the water tasted fresh, they rowed an additional mile upstream before pulling up on the shore. They signaled the other landing boats behind them, then filled their 2 barrels with fresh water. Ben went ashore with several others to forage for food. The meadow hid a few edible plants among its grasses and flowers. He plucked a dandelion leaf to remind himself to pick some on the way back, then continued towards a lone tree in the center of the meadow while others headed for the tree line beyond. Another sailor reached the tree ahead of him. Ben got there just before the first sailor shouted his discovery. Apples! More men swarmed from the boats, but not before Ben picked a ripe apple and climbed to reach more. Other men gathered the apples on the grass beneath the tree, or picked apples from as high as they could easily reach. I feel like John Peter would approve this story.
Yeah.
The apple tasted sour, and it made Ben's teeth bleed to bite through the skin. But even an apple would help fight the scurvy that beleaguered the fishing fleet. When Fleet Captain Aranis ordered them to the ships for a coming storm, they never expected to begin a year's journey with few provisions. Half their full water barrels were offloaded at the time to bring to the families attending the Prince's Festival, leaving them short on water too. Ben tucked his shirt into his pants and filled the shirt with apples, then climbed down and took a bite out of a second apple. "Hey, save some for the cruise," an angry voice shouted behind him. "We need to find more apples and share what we found." "Nope, my apple." He took another bite and headed back toward his landing boat. From here, he could see more of the river and what looked like an old dock further upstream. He went back to his waiting friends and filled the bottom of the boat with apples. "For us," he winked. Ben knew his friends would support him. They'd been together since the Kraken pulled their first ship down earlier in this too-long journey. They managed to remain together when the men of this ship pulled them from the water. He still owed their captain for that. "I'm going to forage upstream a bit. Maybe there's someone we can trade with." His friends took off their shirts and covered the apples. "Trade what? We don't have anything to use for trade." "Who knows what I'll find?" He headed upstream towards the dock. Even if he found nothing, he could try to trade a day's labor for some food. He found a path of beaten grass from the dock and followed it about a mile to the edges of a town. 3 men sat on the grass, leaning against some stumps. They looked like dock workers to Ben, the sort who weren't too smart and worked more to buy their drink than anything else. The jug they passed between them cemented his impression. "Looking for work? None here today unless you got a boat to raid a sunken ship with treasure." His accent was difficult to understand. Whether from the alcohol or just where he lived, Ben couldn't be certain. The other men with him jumped up and covered the man's mouth. "Shut up, Fishker. That's ours for the taking." "Treasure?" Ben was skeptical. "Why didn't you grab it before?" "Storm moved the ship out to deeper waters decades ago. The storm a week before last brought it back to the shallow water. We just need a boat to grab some. We'll even do the diving if you have ropes and you can haul it up to the boat." Ben considered. Monsters. He thought about the giant Kraken squid again. He didn't want to tangle with any more surprises. Monsters guarding it? Fishker shook his head. "Nah, no monsters." His shorter friend leaned forward. "You need to tell him about the..." Fishker slapped his hand across the man's mouth and looked at Ben. "You ain't one of them superstitious idiots, are you?" Ben was superstitious, but he really could use some treasure. Be nice to get some food, too. Even nicer to set himself up as a noble when they got to the new place. Live the life of luxury. What's this so-called curse? There isn't one. People just say that because the last time when my dad brought some back, he and his friends came down with the plague. But it was all over town, Merchants Row and all. He chuckled. "You bring 2 friends to help Paul, and me and my 2 friends will dive, and we'll split everything equal like. I already know where to sell it." They agreed to meet a mile east of the river's outlet in the early morning. Ben knew the fleet would be filling water barrels throughout the day. The next day, Ben and 2 of his friends ate some of their apples and rowed their landing craft towards the east. "Where are you going? Why no barrels this time?" the captain mates called out to him. "Scavenging for food along the shore. I'm really tired of fish." They set off on their way, waiting at the agreed-upon spot till Fishker and his friends staggered down the beach. There was no sign of treachery. The treasure hunters boarded, and they all set off along the shore. When they located the wreck, it was so close to shore that Ben was puzzled. Why didn't they just swim out and grab the treasure? When he looked down through the clear water of the hull, sunlight glinted off something golden through the broken deck. The wreck looked recent. No barnacles crusted the hull. No seaweed grew on its deck or its lines. Other than a dusting of sand, it seemed pristine. The divers went down and attached ropes to the side rails, then came up and breathed heavily for a few minutes. On their next trip down, aided by the ropes, they swarmed into the hull and returned with a golden globe about the size of a man's head. They wrapped the bottom of one rope around it and swam to the surface. "Haul it up. It looks heavier than it looks." "Haul it up. It's heavier than it looks." The divers stayed in the water while Ben's crew hauled up the globe. It sparkled in the sunlight, and the 3 circular dents on one side glowed a faint green. Ben's eyes ached. The divers went down for a second piece. When they returned to the surface again, Ben's crew hauled again. By the time they hauled up the 4th globe, the exhausted swimmers needed help into the boat. Ben was surprised how tired he felt. They worked less than 2 hours, and yet they felt like they rowed and hauled for an entire week. They returned to the river and rowed upstream to the dock. Fishker and one of the men got out and returned shortly with a cart. They soon moved 4 of the globes and covered the cart with a cloth. Ben, Fishker, and one of their friends pushed the cart along the town streets. They stopped at a wooden house off by itself. Fishker knocked on the door and yelled inside, "I have something for you, old man." "Leave me alone." The voice sounded young but cranky. "You will want to see this. 4 globes of pure magic."